I haven't lectured yet, so nice to meet you guys. Today, I'm going to teach testing. So testing is essentially just making sure that your app is running as it should be. And the benefits of testing is that, so a lot of developers, they can't really, they think testing takes too much time in the start, and they would rather just code everything and just like manually test in the browser. This is broken. Anyways, the thing is, when you add new features and stuff like that, bugs will just automatically come up, and it really takes a lot of time to fix those bugs. If you have tests implemented, though, it saves you time in the future because these tests will catch these bugs for you, and then you won't like get caught up with random bugs that you never expected. So testing is really important in that regard. All right, so, oh no, that's not right. That will be later, after my lecture. What do you know about the Rails components of the Rails directory right now? So we learned in the apps folder, it's the home of the MVC model, right? It has models, views, and controllers. And then we learned routes, which is essentially where you have all your web requests defined for Rails to know. And then we have migrations, schemas, and seeds files in your DB folder. That's everything to do with your database for your app. And then we have this folder, tests, where all your tests live. Okay, so let me just go over the components of the test directory, although we're not going to cover all of them in this lecture. So here we have folder for your controller methods tests, and this just tests for functionality of your controllers. Then we have fixtures, which I'll define in more detail later, but fixtures are essentially a way to create test data for your test database. And then helpers are tests for helper methods, which we don't really cover in this course, but they exist. And then integration are tests for multiple controller interactions. And then mailers are tests for mailers, which is like emailing systems. And then models is tests for your models. Right now, I'm just going to go over these. And then, test helper is a default configuration that runs all of your tests, before all of your tests, essentially. And then I'm just going to cover controllers, fixtures, and models in this lecture. Okay, so what are fixtures, first of all? It's a fancy word for sample data that you use to populate your test database. It's populated before all your tests run by this test helper.rb. So you're going to be able to see in your test files that are automatically generated, at the top of each test file, it'll say require test_helper.rb. And what that line does is says, I need to require this test helper, and then the test helper loads every single fixture that you have by default into your test database before all of your tests run. And then fixtures are written in YAML. So what YAML is essentially a markup language. It stands for, there's a debate, it stands for either yet another markup language or a recursive acronym of YAML ain't markup language. But it's essentially an easily readable data serialization format, and you'll be able to see what it looks like when I go into it in the next slide. But yeah, that's what we use to write fixtures. And then there's one fixture file per model, which is automatically generated when you run Rails generate model. So for instance, if you ran Rails generate model user, in the tests directory, you'll have a models directory, and then in that models directory, you'll have user_test.rb, and there can only exist one of them for that user model. Also, even though we just used YAML, Rails knows to be able to integrate embedded Ruby in this YAML file. So you can loop through and create multiple rows in your sample database, in your test database easily, instead of just like writing them manually. Okay, so I'm gonna actually demonstrate how to create a new model and write a fixture for it. So let me make this big. Okay, so I'm gonna create a new app called Test App. And all right, so it's creating all the stuff that we need in a Rails app and installing, bundle installing right now. Okay, so I cd into the test app and I want to open my test folder. So in my test folder, I have a models folder, right? But there's nothing actually in there. So what I want to do is create let's for the purpose of this lecture, I'm going to create a model called book. So Rails generate model book. And I want my model to have titles, which is a string, and then author, which is also a string. Okay, so it generated for me a migration to create books, and then a book.rb model. And then you can also see test unit. It generated for me book_test.rb, which is our test for the book model, and then this fixtures file called books.yaml. So before I do anything, probably migrate first, just so that my schema has this model in it. And then if I go back to Sublime and I open up books, oops, hold on, books.yaml. This is what was automatically generated. And this is YAML format. So what it does is it uses indentation to show hierarchy. And so 1 is actually the title of the, oh, wait, let me go back to my slides. I have this written out. Oh, JK, I'm gonna go back. 1 is the name of the fixture that is essentially a row in the test database. So if I ever wanted to access this row, I would call it by this name 1. But I don't want to call that 1. Let's name it like book 1, and then title would be like book 1. And then author is like author 1. Right? So that's like one way I could write it. But what if I wanted to make 100 books? I can use embedded Ruby, right? Because these Rails YAML files know how to incorporate embedded Ruby in it. So let me just write out some code to make 100 books and automatically like define their titles and authors. Okay. And right now, I don't think you guys should follow along by coding. Just follow along on the slides. I'll have the commands up later on the lab README and then also on Piazza. So don't worry about this. Just make sure you kind of understand what I'm doing. Hold on. And similarly, okay, I'll explain this in the next slide. All right. Okay. Okay, so what I did, here's the code snippet that I just wrote. So let me just go over this. In embedded Ruby, this line here, 100 times do n, that just says loop through 100 times, right? And n is our iterator. So what I'm doing is setting the first line that says book underscore n is setting the fixture name for me to later reference. If I ever wanted to reference like book 5, I would reference it by book underscore 5. And I set the ID here, and then also title to be book n. And author, I have this weird thing here, which is n mod 10, right? That's because I just want, like, if I ever wanted to, so in this case, I only have 10 authors, right? Out of 100, I only have 0 through 9, authors 0 through 9. But, I mean, that's just like how I decided to implement this right now. Okay, so now that we have fixtures created, let's see how can we test if our sample database actually populated. So let's quickly write a function in book underscore test, which is our test model for our test for our book model, and just verify that these fixtures work essentially. I'm going to write out a quick test and explain the parts of this test. Gosh. Okay, so here I have a test written out in my book test. Right here, I define that a test should start with the word test, and then after that, the quotes, whatever in the quotes is essentially what you want to call the test, and it should describe what the test is testing for. So for this test, I say should have same title. I'm just checking that my fixtures were created and that, like, in my fixtures I defined book 3, the fixture titled book 3 or named book 3 should have the title also book 3, right? So this should pass. Let me explain the how you access fixtures. So here I have books, which is my table name, and so that just says I want to reference the table books, and this is the name of the fixture that I want to reference. So if I had named book 3 like Harry underscore Potter or something, I could reference it like this instead. But since the fixture name is book underscore 3, what I had before is how we'll get it. And then this syntax after is your typical Rails syntax to get an attribute, right? And assert equal. If you guys have used assertions in Python, they're similar, but Rails has a library called Minitest that it automatically uses for tests, and they define a bunch of assertions that you can use for your tests. But for example, this one is assert equal, and what it does is it says the first parameter that it takes in is what is expected, and then the second one is what you're actually getting, and they should be equal. If they're not equal, then this is the error message. This is optional. I don't have to have an error message, but yeah, it's there. So if I go to my terminal and I run rake test, says there is an error. Not really sure why there's an error. Oh, YAML indentation. So in my fixtures, I think my indentation is incorrect. Oh. Wait. Oh, here. Yeah. Okay. Right. So that actually worked. It says running, one test, one assertion, no failures, no errors, no skips. I'll go over breaking down what that return format is actually composed of later. But for now, if we look at the test that I wrote, which is the first half of this code portion, I call books and then the fixture name, fixture name to get that fixture, and then the attribute. That's a syntax that we use to get fixtures. And then I didn't write this test out, but another thing we could have tested for is we made 100 books, right? So we wanted to check that all of them were loaded into the test database. We would do book.count to just check that the book table has 100 rows in it. And then rake test is what I just showed you. It runs every single test in your test directory. If you don't want to run every test, which most of the time you probably don't, it takes a while if you have too many tests, then you can do rake test path to test file to run a specific test. For instance, what I wrote was the book_test file, right? So I can do rake test tests/models/book test. And that'll just run my book test. Since I don't have any other tests, it's the same. It'll have the same output. But yeah. You can also do directory-specific tests, like rake tests : controllers just for controller tests, or rake test controller models just for your models tests, stuff like that. Okay, what it looks like to fail. So what does it look like to fail a test? And what does it really tell you when you fail? So I'm gonna purposely fail this test and say assert equal book 3 should have title Harry Potter, which is false. And then let's run the test. All right, so here, before it had a period here, but now it has an F, which means fail. And then it gives you every single failure that you did, or every single error that you had. So here we just had one failure, and it actually tells me where the fail happened. It tells me the file first, which is the test for the book model, and then it tells me the method, or the test method that it failed at. Test should have same title. It failed right there, and then it gives me the path, right, to that model, or to that file, and the line, which is really helpful. And then prints the error statement that I put in, titled wrong. If I didn't have that, it wouldn't have this here, but since I have it, it can help you debug if it clearly tells you what is wrong. And then it has what was expected in the assertion and what was actually given in the assertion. And so that's very helpful in debugging and miles easier than trying to find bugs on your own and debugging those through a browser. So yeah, I just covered what it looks like to fail. Here you have the number of tests that you ran. So every single character counts as one test. And then if there's an F, that means it fails. And here it's giving you what test model it is, or test file it is, and then what method it failed at, what test it failed at, and right. You can have E's for errors. Okay, so now that we've covered what tests basically look like and how the output basically looks, we're gonna go over model testing. Model testing is, okay, so You can automatically get these model tests when you do Rails generate, which I demonstrated earlier when I did Rails generate model book. It created for me this book.test, book_test file, right? And then these tests for models essentially test for model-specific functionalities. Like, the biggest thing that comes to mind is validations, because that's most important for models. You want to verify that validations are working correctly. But there are other things that you have in models, like model-specific methods and scopes and stuff like that. How we test is mostly based off assertions. And these are, like I demonstrated with assert equals, these are just automatically pulled from the mini test library, which Rails uses for their testing functionality. You can look at all the different assertions at this URL. It gives you, I don't think it gives you all of them, but it gives you the ones that are useful. So here, it gives you a list of like assert not equal, assert match, assert throws if it throws an error, instance of, all that. And then it also gives you Rails-specific assertions. So these are things that are like specific to Rails and useful for Rails. For instance, when you're redirecting in a method, you have assert redirected to check that that worked, which is really helpful when you're debugging like a controller method that should redirect to this page, but for some reason it isn't, stuff like that. You can also create your own custom assertions. We won't be covering that, but it's really cool, so you guys should look it up if you have time. There are plenty of Stack Overflow posts and other places that you can learn about that. All right, so I'm gonna actually write a validation for our books model and test that that validation works. So if I go to book.rb, right, and we don't currently have anything in here, but I want to validate that a title is always present and that it's always unique as well. I don't want copy books in my library, right? So I'll add this line, validates title present is true, and also uniqueness is true. So that's just saying has to have the title, has to be unique. All right, so to test that this works, I'm gonna go to my book test again and say, I'm gonna create a test that says it should not ever save a book object without a title. So that's validating the presence, right? All right, so I'm gonna create a new variable book that is just a new book instance. And then I want to assert not book.save, which essentially says book.save should not be true. So if book.save is not true, that means it didn't save into the database because something was wrong. The validation didn't pass, right? And then I'm going to add in this optional error message again to just show what would be wrong if this didn't pass, if this test didn't pass. Saved a book without a title. Okay. Now go back to my terminal and type in rake test. All right. So now I have two tests. Oh, the first one failed because I changed that. Yeah. But you can see that both of them actually pass now, right? So I have two periods, meaning they both passed, two assertions, 0 fails. Cool. So basically, I created a new book model, but I didn't give it anything. I didn't give it a title. I didn't give it a author or anything like that. What if I just did title Harry Potter? Okay. And I ran my test again. giving me a failure because this actually has a title. And so when I did book.save, that returned true because it saved successfully into my database. And so when we did the assertion, it wasn't false. And so essentially this error message was thrown and we have a failure. But don't do this because that's not what this test is testing for. So I want to do what I had before, where this book doesn't have a title and it shouldn't save. Cool. Now let's test for uniqueness, which is essentially the same thing. And I'm going to make a new test method for that. Just say should not save if title not unique. Ooh. And then I'm going to create a book again with title book 1. That already exists in our fixtures, right? A book with title book 1 because we did 1 through 100 or whatever. And so when we do assert not book.save, we're just saying since this isn't a unique title, it should not save. It should not successfully save. All right, so that looks like it worked, right? Everything passed, which is what we expect, and that's good. All right. Now, how do we test for controllers, and how are they different? So controllers are more used for functional testing, right? So functions that you have in your local host. So for instance, if you're routing to a new path to create a new book, right? You want to test that that routing works, that request works. And that's what we usually test for in controller tests. So when we do Rails generate controller creates, Rails generate controller, it creates a bunch of files, right? It creates your controller file, and then it also creates a test file for this controller. So I'm going to create a books controller. Yeah. All right, so it created for me the controller file, and then here we can see it also created the test file, which is good. All right. Yeah, so these controller tests test actions within a single controller. They're usually web requests, testing if it was successful, redirect tests, testing if it redirected to the desired path or page, testing if an appropriate message was displayed, stuff like that. All right, so I'm going to write a controller test to demonstrate how that works. So I have my books controller. Let me just make a few routes for books. So we learned a quick and easy way to have all the CRUD routes, right? Resources, books. And let me just verify that these routes exist. Break routes shows you every single route that your routes file defines, right? So cool, I have all the books routing that I need. Going back to Sublime, I'm going to edit my books controller so that it has an index method so that I can see every single book in my database in the index page. All right, and then I have to also create the template, right, in my views. This is all stuff that you should be going through in like these labs and the project to create new pages and new views and routes. But yeah, so I'm defining index.html.erb. And then in index, I just want to be able to print every single book, its title, and its author. Okay. And then let's make sure that this works in our local host. So I'm going to start my server. This is just an alias. It basically just said Rails server, right? Okay, I'm going to go to localhost. There's nothing on the home page because I don't have a home page, right? I didn't define a view for that. But I did define my index page for books. So I'm going to go to books. Oops, typo. All right, so here I have my index page for books. Why is it empty? You guys know? Didn't we have like 100 books that we loaded into the database? Actually, no, we didn't. So fixtures only load before a test, and they only exist during the test. After that, they're wiped clean. The database is wiped. And so I don't actually have anything in my database because I don't have seeds that I created. The fixtures didn't last. So a really easy way to just have my fixtures loaded into my real database, my environment for localhost, is to run rakedb fixtures load. Normally, I don't think you guys will have to use this line ever because you guys should have seeds instead for your database, but right now I'm just going to do that for simplicity's sake. Right. Run my server again. Okay. Now I have all my 100 books, right? Cool. So many. Now I want to test that this controller function index actually works. So let me go to my controller test. And I'm going to write a new test called test should get index. This is just testing that the route is making this get request successfully. So the syntax for this is get index, and then assert response, which is another one of those Rails specific assertions, success, and assert not nil assigns books. All right, so this line is making this simulation get request to index on my books controller. It already knows that it's in the books controller because this is the books controller test. So you don't need to define like which controller it's using. And then assert response is just saying that the response should have a success ID. I think it's like 200 or something, but Rails knows that success is like the code word for whatever number it is. And then assert not nil means that books, which is the parameter that, or the variable I created for my index method, it shouldn't be nil. It should have stuff in it because it has all the books in my database, right? So it's just checking that that's not nil. If I run my test, and I'm just going to run my controller tests for now. So rake test :controllers. All right, cool. So I have 2 assertions in my test, and it looks like the test passed successfully. Going back to the slides. This simulates the GET request, like I said, right, on action index. And then this makes sure that the request worked. And this checks that @books was successfully assigned, and it's not new. Right. The cool thing is this syntax works for requests that need parameters as well. So you can do get show to request the action show, but shows are almost always, they need IDs as parameters, right? You want to show one specific book. So say you want to show book ID with ID 11, then you can put that in as a parameter, ID equals 11, and it'll actually simulate that for you. it'll try to make a get request on the show page for book 11. Okay, so that was just a quick and really high-level overview of testing. Do you guys have any questions? Sorry I didn't ask more often, just like blasting through. Okay, well, I'll go over logistics really quick. You guys should have all seen the Piazza post about Project 1 being released this past Sunday. So it'll be due in, not this coming Sunday, but next Sunday, November 2nd at midnight. Project 2 is kind of in the future, but you should be thinking about it because it's a group project. So start trying to gather in groups of up to 4. You can do it alone or you can do it with 3 other teammates. We'll give you time next week during lecture to form groups in class if you need, and also to brainstorm ideas for your app. Is the guest lecture? Okay, so now we're gonna have a guest lecture. Yeah.